What if one phrase could shatter a billionaire's empire? We are not talking about a stock market crash, nor a corporate scandal whispered in boardrooms. We are talking about a phrase uttered by a 24-year-old waitress in the middle of a crowded five-star restaurant. Everett Winslow, a man whose name is etched across the New York City skyline, thought he could humiliate anyone without consequences. He chose the wrong person. He was about to learn that the past he had buried did not just have ghosts, it had a voice. And when that voice spoke, it was loud enough to bring his entire world to a deadly silence. Stay with us as we unravel the story of how one woman's courage exposed a lie kept for over 2 decades. Aurelia Restaurant was not simply a place to eat, it was a statement. Perched on the 60th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city's glittering nervous system. The air inside was a carefully curated blend of expensive perfume, simmering truffle oil, and the low, confident hum of the city's elite. Conversations were currency, and a table at Aurelia meant you had enough to spend. This night, the restaurant's gravitational center was a corner booth occupied by Everett Winslow. At 62, Everett was less a man and more a monument to voracious ambition. His face, weathered by boardroom battles and insufficient sleep, remained handsome in a stern, leonine way. His hair was the color of polished silver, swept back with a product that likely cost more than the average family's weekly grocery bill. He was the CEO and founder of Winslow Industries, a real estate colossus that had devoured competitors and reshaped skylines with brutal efficiency. His name was on buildings, on charity wings, and in his rivals' nightmares. Across from him sat his son, Wyatt, a younger, softer echo of the man before him. At 28, Wyatt had his father's height, but his mother's gentler features. He wore his bespoke suit with an unease Everett had never possessed, as if he were still playing dress-up in his father's closet. "The Henderson deal is about leverage, Wyatt, pure and simple," Everett was saying, his voice a low rumble, cutting through the restaurant's polite murmur. He gestured with a fork, a silver scepter in his hand. "They think they have a position of strength. We need to remind them their strength is a privilege we grant, not a right they possess." "Father, their quarterly reports are solid," Wyatt countered, his tone respectful yet firm. "Going hostile might not be the best look. The press is already—" "The press?" Everett scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "The press is a fly. You swat it. You don't build your strategy around its buzzing." He took a sip from his $400 bottle of Chateau Margaux, his eyes scanning the room with an air of bored ownership. He hadn't just paid for a meal. He had rented the deference of the entire establishment for the night. It was in this moment of regal dismissal that Daphne Miller approached the table. To Aurelia's patrons, she was part of the landscape, as functional and unmemorable as crystal water glasses or linen napkins. She was 24, with tired but intelligent eyes, and light brown hair pulled into a severe bun per regulations. She moved with a practiced economy that spoke of years in the service industry. Her uniform, an impeccable black blouse and trousers, was immaculate yet anonymous. She was designed to be invisible, and that was precisely her plan. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a rhythm of terror and resolve. For 6 months she had worked here, enduring condescending patrons and aching feet. All for this. She had studied the reservation lists, waiting for his name to appear. Tonight, it had. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" her voice asked, firm despite the tremor in her hands. Everett didn't even look at her. He was still focused on Wyatt. "The problem with your generation, Wyatt, is that you confuse politeness with power. They are not the same." Finally, he shifted his gaze to Daphne, not as a person, but as an interruption. "The wine is adequate. The steak, however," he poked the filet mignon on his plate. "This is medium. I ordered rare. A deep red center. This is pink. Is the concept of temperature so difficult to grasp in the kitchen?" Daphne's breath caught, but she held her composure. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Winslow. I'll have the chef prepare another for you immediately." "Don't bother," he snapped, pushing the plate an inch away from himself. "The moment is ruined. The entire rhythm of the meal is off-kilter." He looked at her. Then he truly looked at her, and his expression was one of deep irritation, the kind one might reserve for a stain on a favorite tie. "What is your name?" "Daphne, sir." "Daphne," he repeated, savoring the name with disdain. "Well, Daphne, incompetence has consequences. In my world, mistakes like this cost millions. In your world, it seems it only ruins my dinner. I expect this to be reflected on the bill." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. "Father, it's just a steak. The young woman has apologized." "Be quiet, Wyatt," Everett ordered, his eyes still fixed on Daphne. "This is a lesson in standards. People must understand that mediocrity will not be tolerated." Humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her. The surrounding tables had silenced their occupants, sensing the friction, the raw display of power. It was the primal thrill of the arena, the lion toying with its prey. They watched, their faces a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Daphne felt a rush of adrenaline that burned through her fear. This was the moment she had rehearsed in her small, one-bedroom apartment 1,000 times, the moment she had both dreaded and yearned for in equal measure. Her carefully constructed composure was a shell, and it was about to crack. She took a small, almost imperceptible step back from the table, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their tremor. She looked at Everett Winslow, not as a server, not as an inferior, but as an equal, as an accuser. "You're right," her voice said, suddenly clear and resonant, carrying further than she intended. "Incompetence, it does have consequences." Everett raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sudden shift in her tone, a flash of backbone. "How interesting. You're fired, by the way. You can collect your things." He turned to his son, considering the matter closed, but Daphne did not move. And also, the cruelty continued, her voice gaining strength and abandon. Now Everett turned completely, his face darkening. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "I suggest you walk away now before I have you removed. You have no idea who you are talking to." "Oh, yes, I do," Daphne said, and the words felt like they were torn from the deepest part of her soul. "I know exactly who you are, Everett." The use of his first name was a shocking breach of protocol. The restaurant manager, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Dubois, began hurrying from across the room. Wyatt looked mortified, his face flushed. Everett Winslow slowly placed his fork and knife on the table, the clink of silver carrying an unsettling finality. He leaned forward, his voice a menacing whisper that somehow was louder than a shout. "You have made a catastrophic mistake," he began, raising his voice, the dam of his civility breaking. "Do you think you can walk in here, into this place, and speak to me with such disrespect? You are nothing, a speck, a nobody who will be forgotten by the time I sign the credit card receipt." His voice rose with each word, a crescendo of pure, unchecked arrogance. The entire restaurant was now frozen, a tableau of horrified faces and suspended wine glasses. "I could buy this building and have it torn down with you still inside. I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this city again." He was mid-diatribe, his face contorted into a mask of rage, when Daphne delivered the line she had carried like a stone in her heart for 24 years. She held his furious gaze, and with a voice that was eerily calm amidst the storm he had created, she uttered a single sentence. "You screamed just like you did the night you left my mother to die." Silence. It wasn't a gradual quiet, it was a sudden, violent vacuum of sound, as if a switch had been flicked in the universe. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the distant city traffic, all vanished. Mr. Dubois, who had been rushing over, stopped dead in his tracks. Wyatt's jaw literally dropped. Every patron, from hedge fund managers to society ladies, stared open-mouthed, but their reactions were irrelevant. The only reaction that mattered was at the corner table. Everett Winslow froze. The rage on his face didn't just fade. It shattered, replaced by a ghostly, pale gray. His mouth remained slightly agape. The last venomous word he was about to spit died on his lips. His eyes, those famously predatory eyes, were wide with a sickening dread Daphne had only seen in animals caught in headlights. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, it wasn't with contempt or annoyance. It was with a dawning, sickening horror of recognition. The name he had buried, the face he had erased, the night he had tried to forget. It was all there, reflected in the eyes of the waitress he had just tried to destroy. The entire restaurant, a room full of New York City's most powerful people, remained absolutely, completely, and devastatingly silent. The monument had cracked. The silence in Aurelia stretched for an eternity that lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven of shock and disbelief. In that silence, Daphne felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a film. The faces around her were a blur of gaping mouths and wide eyes. Mr. Dubois stood like a statue, his hands half raised in a gesture of aborted intervention. Wyatt looked from his father to Daphne and back, his expression one of absolute perplexity. Then Everett moved. It was a small, jerky motion, like a puppet, whose strings had just been severed. He blinked once, twice. The ghostly gray of his skin began to be replaced by a mottled, angry red. "That's—" his voice started, a hoarse croak, nothing like his previous booming rage. "That's a lie. That's slander." He pushed himself up from the booth, his movements clumsy. "This is an attempt at extortion. It's pathetic, disgusting blackmail." He looked around the room, trying to reassert his dominance, but his eyes were wild. He was no longer the lion. He was the one who had been wounded. The other patrons no longer looked at him with fear, but with a new, ravenous curiosity. This was better than gossip. This was a public execution of a reputation. Daphne did not back down. She had anticipated this, the denial, the attack. From a pocket in her apron, she pulled a small, tarnished silver locket, its chain coiled in her palm. It was old and cheap, the kind you might win at a county fair. "She wore it every day," Daphne said, her voice still eerily firm. "Her name was Isla." "Isla Penrose. You called her Izzy." The name hit Everett physically. He visibly recoiled. Izzy, a name he hadn't heard or allowed himself to think of in over 2 decades. It was a name from another life, a life of cheap apartments, instant noodles, and a love so fierce it felt like it could fuel an entire city. A life he had systematically dismantled and buried. Wyatt stood now, his face a mask of confusion. "Father, what is she talking about? Who is she?" "She is nobody," Everett roared, finally finding his voice again, though it was strained and brittle. "She's a lunatic. Security, get her out of here." But Daphne held up the locket. "You gave it to her on her 19th birthday. You were broke. You told her one day you'd replace it with diamonds. She told you she preferred the silver because it was from you." Every detail was a hammer against the fortress Everett had built around his past. He stared at the locket, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He remembered. He remembered the feel of the cheap metal in his hand, the hopeful, dazzling smile on Izzy's face, the cramped warmth of their tiny apartment in the village. Mr. Dubois finally found his feet and scurried over, his face ashen. "Miss, please, you need to come with me." Daphne ignored him. Her focus was entirely on Everett. "You don't have to believe me," her voice said, softening slightly, which was somehow more damning than her anger. "But you know it's true. I have her eyes, and you did." As the shock receded, recognition crystallized, the shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, and most of all, her eyes. They were Isla's eyes, eyes that had once looked at him with adoration, and now gazed back with the cold, clear light of judgment. Everett Winslow, the man who never backed down, did the unthinkable. He turned and fled. He practically shoved his son out of the way, bursting toward the exit, without another word, without his coat, without a glance back. The titan of industry did not walk. He ran like a common thief. Wyatt, pale and shaking, hesitated for a second, his gaze fixed on Daphne. He looked utterly lost, a child whose entire world had just been upended. Then he turned and hurried after his father, leaving behind a half-eaten meal, a half-drunk $400 bottle of wine, and the deafening hum of scandal that had just erupted in their wake. The moment the Winslows left, the restaurant exploded in a cacophony of whispers. Daphne finally let out a breath she felt she had been holding for her entire life. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the table for stability. "You're fired, of course," hissed Mr. Dubois, his professional terror now turning into managerial fury. "Out! I'll have security escort you." "That won't be necessary," Daphne said, her strength returning. Slowly, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table beside Everett Winslow's untouched plate. She met Mr. Dubois's gaze. "I quit." She walked out of Aurelia, not through the staff entrance in the back, but through the front doors, straight past the stunned hostess. She didn't run. She walked with a dignity she'd never been allowed in that room before. The cold New York City night air hit her face, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like freedom. An hour later, she was sitting in a downtown diner, a world away from Aurelia's opulence. The coffee was bitter, the lighting fluorescent, and the booth seat was cracked vinyl. Across from her sat Liam O'Connell, a freelance journalist with an insatiable appetite for truth and a perpetually crumpled trench coat. "You really did it," Liam said, shaking his head in disbelief, a grin spreading across his face. "I've already got 3 different sources calling me. Billionaire flees 5-star restaurant after confrontation with Waitress. It's going to be everywhere by morning." Daphne wrapped her cold hands around the hot mug. "It had to be public, Liam. You know why. If I had approached him privately, He would have crushed me, paid me off, or threatened me, and I would have disappeared. It had to be somewhere he couldn't control the narrative, somewhere with witnesses. And you gave them one hell of a show, Liam said, pulling out a notepad. So he ran. He actually ran like his life depended on it. He did, Daphne confirmed, a grim satisfaction in her voice. He recognized the locket. He recognized me, or at least he recognized her in me. Liam leaned forward, his expression turning serious. This is just the beginning, Daphne. He's not going to let this go. His entire empire is built on an image of untouchable power. You just proved he's touchable. He's going to come after you hard. I know, she said quietly, but he doesn't know what we have. Daphne's quest wasn't just for recognition, it was for justice. And it was rooted in a memory, a fractured, terrifying recollection from when she was 4 years old. Flashback, 20 years ago. The memory was a collage of sensations. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, the taste of salt from her own tears, the flashing red and blue lights that painted strange, dancing patterns on the ceiling of their small apartment. She remembered her mother, Isla, laughing earlier that day. Izzy was all vibrant colors and boundless energy, a painter who worked on huge canvases that took up half their living room, smelling of turpentine and passion. But then came the man Daphne was told to call Mark. He didn't visit often anymore. When he did, the laughter stopped. Their voices were sharp, angry whispers from the other room. Daphne would hide behind the sofa, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She heard words she didn't understand. Selling out, promise, better life, forgetting us. Then a slamming door. Her mother crying. Later, a sound from the rickety fire escape outside their window. A thud. A terrible, guttural cry of pain. Daphne had run to the window. Her mother lay on the wet alley pavement below, twisted at an unnatural angle, and Mark, Everett Winslow, stood over her. He wasn't screaming for help. He was on his phone, his voice low and urgent. It happened. Yes, the fire escape. It's a mess. Handle this. Then he looked up, and his eyes met Daphne's through the window. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He didn't wave. He didn't come get her. He finished his call, got into a sleek black car that had been waiting at the end of the alley, and drove away. He left her there. He left her mother to die alone on the pavement while he called his fixer to handle it. The official report would later call it a tragic accident, a faulty railing on an old fire escape, a possibly inebriated woman who slipped and fell, case closed, present. He didn't just leave her, Liam, Daphne said, her voice trembling with the weight of 2 decades' memory. He was there. He watched her die and called someone to clean it up, not to save her. He chose his ambition over her life. Liam listened, his pen still. And we're going to prove it, he said, his voice a low promise. The performance at Aurelia was Act 1. Now the real fight begins. Daphne nodded, staring into her coffee. The image of Everett Winslow's shattered face in the restaurant was satisfying, but it was fleeting. The real prize was the truth, and she knew he would use every cent of his billion-dollar fortune to keep it buried. The Blacktown car sped through the canyons of Manhattan, a silent projectile cutting through the city's nocturnal energy. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the air outside. Everett stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the familiar blur of neon and steel. He saw a ghost. Isla's face, 20 years younger, superimposed over the streetlights, her laughter echoing in the hum of the tires. "Father," Wyatt said, breaking the suffocating silence. "Father, you have to say something. Who was that woman? What did she mean about her mother?" Everett slowly turned his head, his eyes looking old and vacant. "She's a liar," he rasped, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "A con artist. Sees a rich man and invents a story for a payout. It's the oldest trick in the book." "She knew your name," Wyatt pressed, his voice trembling slightly. "She said you were called Mark. She knew about a locket." He trailed off, unable to voice the most damning part. "She has your jaw. She has eyes I've only seen in your old pictures." Details can be bought or dug up by some hack journalist. Everett slammed his fist on the leather seat. "This is a coordinated attack, Wyatt. A threat to this family, to everything I've built." "Is it?" Wyatt asked, a note of defiance creeping into his voice. "Or is it the truth?" Everett glared at his son, a fresh surge of fury rising within him. "You will not question me. No, you will stand by me now, and we will crush this. Understood?" Wyatt flinched under his father's gaze, giving a clipped, resentful nod. The car pulled up to the imposing driveway of the Winslow Tower on Park Avenue, a monument of glass and black marble that served as both his corporate headquarters and his residence for the blind in the penthouse. As he swept into the lobby, his mind was already working, the shock giving way to cold, ruthless strategy. The girl, Daphne, was a problem. Problems were to be dismantled, neutralized, and erased. The moment he entered his penthouse, his second wife, Catherine, was there to greet him. She was a woman who seemed carved from ice, elegant and impeccably preserved, her life a testament to charity galas and art auctions. "Everett, darling, you're home early," she said, gliding towards him. "My phone's been buzzing. A text from Sarah Lexington. She was at Aurelia. Said there was quite a scene." "It was nothing," Everett said, loosening his tie. "A disgruntled employee. It's been handled." "She said the woman claimed to be your daughter," Catherine stated, her voice perfectly even, but her eyes sharp, analytical. Everett finally stopped and looked at her. "And you believe the ramblings of a waitress over your husband of 25 years? "I believe something happened to make you leave a restaurant without paying the bill," she retorted coolly. "That's not in your character." Before he could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID read Ellison. He walked to his study, a cavernous room of dark wood and leather, and closed the door. "What?" he answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. It belonged to Arthur Ellison, a man who existed in the shadows of Everett's life. Officially, he was the head of corporate security, but his real title was Fixer. He was the man Everett had called that rainy night 2 decades ago. "Sir, my monitoring services have lit up. A major spike in social media chatter originating from Aurelia, all tied to your name," Ellison said. "I'm already working to contain it, but it's spreading fast." "I need more than containment, Arthur," Everett said, his voice low and dangerous. "I need you to find out everything there is to know about a waitress named Daphne Miller. Where she lives, who her friends are, where she buys her coffee. I want to know what she had for breakfast. I want leverage. Something to make her disappear." "I'm already on it, sir," he replied. Initial search connects her to a freelance journalist, Liam O'Connell, with a reputation for being a rabble-rouser. "Then give him problems," Everett commanded. "I want this squashed by morning, whatever it takes." "Understood, sir," Ellison said. "There is one more thing. The name she used, Isla Penrose." Everett's hand tightened on his phone. "What about it?" "The records from 20 years ago, the ones we sealed. I've double-checked. They're secure. The police report, the coroner's findings. The official narrative is rock solid. Make sure it stays that way," Everett commanded, and hung up. He sank into his leather chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation subsiding, leaving behind a cold dread. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, old photograph, tucked beneath a pile of newer, shinier family pictures. It was of him, taken in a photo booth. He was a young man with more hair and a hungry look in his eyes, his arms slung around a beautiful dark-haired girl who was laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. They were poor, ridiculously in love, and believed they could conquer the world. He had conquered the world, but he had done it by sacrificing her. Flashback, 21 years ago. "Izzy, a partnership with a major developer. Mark, this is it." Everett burst into their tiny apartment, waving a sheaf of papers. "This is it. This is our way out of this dump." Isla, her hands stained with paint, looked up from her canvas. "That's wonderful, Mark, but what does it mean?" "It means I need you to look the part. Act the part," he said, pacing excitedly. "We need to go to dinners, to parties. We need to network, to impress people." He looked around their apartment, the paint splatters on the floor, the mismatched furniture. His gaze fell on her. "You'll have to, tone down the art. Wear something more classic." Isla's smile faltered. "Tone it down. My art is who I am, Mark." "It's a hobby, babe," he said, trying to be gentle, but the condescension was there. "My work is a career. It's our future. Don't you want a better life for us, for little Daphne?" Their 1-year-old daughter slept in her crib in the corner, and the argument that followed was the first of many. He wanted to change his name to Everett Winslow. It sounded more powerful than Mark. He wanted to move into a sterile high-rise. He wanted her to be a corporate wife, not a bohemian artist. Every step he took towards his new life was a step away from the world they had built together. He saw her as an anchor. She saw him as a man losing his soul. The final break came a year later. He had secured his fortune. He offered her a settlement, a nice apartment, child support. "It's for the best, Easy," he had said, unable to meet her eyes. "We're just from different worlds now." "You built your new world on the promises you made in this one," she had whispered, tears streaming down her face, clutching their daughter, "and you're a coward for abandoning it." Present. The memory was a sharp ache in his chest. He had told himself it was necessary, a clean break. He had provided for them from a distance through a blind trust. But then came the accident. Ellison had called him. "There's been an incident. She fell." Everett had rushed to the scene. Seeing her lying there, broken, had shattered him. The old love, the guilt, it all came rushing back, but also the terror. What would the press say? A billionaire's secret ex-lover dead in an alley. It would ruin him, his career, his new marriage to Catherine. Everything was at stake. So he made the call. "Handle this." Ellison had handled it. The right palms were greased. The correct reports were filed. Isla Penrose became a tragic footnote, and Mark became Everett Winslow forever. He placed the photograph back in the drawer and locked it. The ghost had been buried once. He would bury it again, even if it meant burying his daughter too. Meanwhile, Daphne and Liam were poring over a laptop in the diner. The first blog posts were already appearing. Sensational headlines, blurry cell phone photos. "They're painting you as a crazy stalker, an extortionist," Liam noted, scrolling through the comments. "The Winslow PR machine is already spinning up." "Let them," Daphne said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They're confirming I exist. They're putting my name out there. That's a mistake, because now people will start digging." Liam pointed to a file on the screen. "Speaking of digging, I found something. Your mother's original autopsy report. I had to pull a lot of favors to get an unredacted copy from a source at the city archives." He opened the file. "Official cause of death, blunt force trauma consistent with a fall from height. Blood alcohol level, 0.09, just over the legal limit, case closed." "My mother barely drank," Daphne said coldly, "especially not when I was home." "I know," Liam said, "but that's not the interesting part. Look at this." He zoomed in on a section of the report. "Initial paramedic on scene, named George Pruitt, filed a preliminary assessment. Notes here say victim was responsive upon arrival, possible spinal injury, requested immediate transport to trauma center." Daphne stared at the screen. "She was alive when they got there?" "According to this, yes," Liam said, his voice grim. "But look at the official timeline. The ambulance didn't transport her for another 45 minutes. By the time she reached the hospital, she was pronounced dead on arrival." 45 minutes. An eternity. "Why the delay?" Daphne whispered, a cold sickness spreading through her. "That's the million-dollar question," Liam said, closing the laptop. "Oh, in your father's case, the billion-dollar question. The paramedic, George Pruitt, retired 5 years ago, lives in Staten Island. I think it's time we paid him a visit." The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a billionaire with unlimited resources and a dark secret to protect. On the other, a determined daughter, armed with the truth, and a journalist who wouldn't back down. The siege on Everett Winslow's fortress had begun. The morning sun did little to warm the cold, sterile atmosphere of the Winslow Industries boardroom. Everett stood before his board of directors, a collection of stony-faced men and women who valued stock prices above all else. The story had exploded overnight. It was no longer a gossip blog TV. It was a headline on the Wall Street Journal website, a trending topic on Twitter. "Winslow turmoil. Billionaire accused by alleged daughter in public spectacle." "It's a plot, baseless extortion," Everett declared, his voice a hammer of authority trying to pound the situation back into shape. "A disgruntled former employee coached by a parasitic journalist. Our legal team is filing a defamation suit as we speak, and Mr. Ellison's department is handling the security aspects. This is a nuisance, nothing more. Now, regarding quarterly projections..." He tried to pivot, to steer the conversation back to the familiar, comfortable language of money, but the room remained tense. A veteran board member, a shrewd woman named Evelyn Reed, cleared her throat. "Everett," she said, her tone polite but laced with steel, "your personal life is yours until it affects the stock price. Our stock is down 4% pre-market trading. A nuisance is not what shareholders are calling this. They're calling it a liability. We need a more robust strategy than simply handling it." The unspoken question hung in the air. Is it true? Everett felt the walls of his control closing in. For the first time, The board looked at him not as a leader, but as a problem. "The strategy is to starve it of oxygen," he snapped. "We issue a firm denial, refuse all comment, and let the lawsuit speak. It will be old news in 48 hours. But it wouldn't be. He knew it. This fire felt different. The pressure wasn't only in the boardroom. At the family breakfast table, an unsettling silence prevailed. Catherine picked at a grapefruit with surgical precision, her face an unreadable mask. Wyatt stared into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. "The University Endowment Board has called an emergency meeting," Catherine said without looking up. "Regarding my chairmanship, they're concerned about the optics." "They're vultures," Everett muttered. "They're protecting their brand," Catherine corrected him. "Just as you are attempting to protect yours. The question they're asking, and the one I'm asking, Everett, is what exactly are you protecting?" Before he could formulate a response, Wyatt finally spoke. "I looked her up," he said quietly. "Daphne Miller. She has a social work degree from Hunter College. Graduated with honors, no criminal record. She's been working 2 jobs to pay off her student loans." "So she's clever. Makes her more dangerous," Everett shot back, his temper fraying. "Stay out of this, Wyatt. You don't understand the forces at play." "I want to understand," Wyatt said, standing up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "I want to understand how a man who preaches about legacy and family could have a secret daughter who has to work as a waitress. Is that the legacy you want, Father? A legacy of secrets and cruelty?" "I am this family," Everett roared, rising to his full height. "Everything you have is because of me. You will show me respect." The standoff was broken by the chime of Catherine's phone. She glanced at it, and a flash of something, surprise, alarm, crossed her face. She quickly tucked it into her pocket. The tension was unbearable. Wyatt, seeing he would get no answers, turned and left the room, leaving Everett to his wife's silent judgment and the wreckage of his morning. Meanwhile, Daphne and Liam were navigating the quiet, tree-lined streets of Staten Island. They found George Pruitt's address, a modest, well-kept house with a garden gnome on the lawn. An older man with a kind, tired face and a noticeable limp answered the door. "Mr. Pruitt," Liam began. "My name is Liam O'Connell. I'm a journalist. This is Daphne Miller. We'd like to ask you about a call you responded to 20 years ago." George Pruitt's friendly demeanor vanished. A closed, guarded look came over his face. "20 years ago, son? I was a paramedic for 30 years. That's thousands of calls. I don't recall." "We think you might remember this one," Daphne said gently. "An alley in the village. A woman named Isla Penrose fell from a fire escape." The color drained from George's face. He clutched the doorframe. "No, I have nothing to say about that." He started to close the door. "She was alive when you got there," Daphne blurted, her voice desperate. "Your report said," she was responsive, "but she died. They said she died on the way to the hospital. Please. She was my mother." The words, "my mother," stopped him. He looked at Daphne's face, at her familiar, pleading eyes. The guilt he had carried for 2 decades churned in his stomach. "You should leave," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're stirring up things best left buried." He closed the door, leaving them standing on his porch. "He knows," Liam said, turning to Daphne. "He's terrified, but he knows something." As they walked back to the car, Daphne's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "They're watching you. The man in the black SUV at the end of the street. Be careful. This is bigger than you think." Daphne's blood ran cold. She glanced down the street. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked half a block away. It started its engine and slowly drove away. "Ellison's men, Liam. We need to go now," she said, her heart pounding. The threats were no longer abstract. They were real, and they were close. That afternoon, the intimidation escalated. While Daphne was out meeting Liam to discuss their next move, her small apartment was ransacked. Nothing was stolen, but everything was disturbed. Her books were tossed from their shelves, her clothes pulled from her closet. A single photograph of her and her mother, the only one she kept on display, was turned to face the wall. It was a violation, a message. "We can get to you anytime we want." Daphne stood in the middle of the mess, feeling a profound sense of despair. Was it worth it? The fear, the invasion, the constant looking over her shoulder. She sank onto her disheveled bed, the weight of the fight pressing down on her. Her phone rang. It was Liam. "Don't panic," he said. "But my laptop has been remotely wiped. Everything, my source files, my contacts. They're trying to cut us off at the knees. How are you? My apartment, she said, her voice hollow. Liam, maybe he'll win. Maybe he's too powerful. No, Liam said, his voice fierce. This is what they do, Daphne. They intimidate, they harass, they try to make you feel small and alone. It means they're scared. It means we're getting close. We just need to find a different way in. Just as Daphne was about to lose hope, her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. He's not the only one with secrets. Check the Catherine Winslow Arts Foundation's annual reports, specifically the anonymous donations from 25 years ago. Follow the money. Daphne stared at the message, her mind racing. Catherine Winslow? Why would his wife help her? Unless Catherine didn't know she was helping. Across town in the Winslow penthouse, Catherine was in her private study after her husband had stormed off to the office. She had acted on a suspicion that had been growing since the scene at the restaurant. Everett was a man of meticulous records, but also a man of deep secrets. She knew there were parts of his life before her that were strictly off limits. She went to an old, locked filing cabinet in the back of his study, one she hadn't opened in years. She remembered the combination from a long-forgotten conversation. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside were dusty files from his early business days and, tucked in the very back, a thin folder labeled Isla Trust. She opened it. It contained legal documents setting up a blind trust for an Isla Penrose and her infant daughter, Daphne Penrose. And beneath that, a single folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. It was in elegant feminine handwriting. Mark, it began, I cannot accept this money. It feels like blood money, a payment to make you forget. I don't want your money. I want the man I fell in love with, the man who gave me a silver locket and promised me a life, not a settlement. Please, Mark, don't do this. Don't throw us away. Catherine sank into a chair, the letter trembling in her hand. So it was all true. Her husband of 25 years, the father of her son, had another family, a family he had discarded like a failed business venture. The calculated, cruel coldness of it struck her to the core. Her marriage, her life, it was all built on a foundation of lies and a woman's broken heart. The cracks in Everett Winslow's fortress were no longer just on the outside. They were spiderwebbing through the very heart of his home. And Catherine, the woman who had been his greatest asset, was about to become his most dangerous liability. The anonymous tip led Daphne and Liam into a digital maze of financial reports. In a secure co-working space, Liam's fingers flew across the keyboard of a new, encrypted laptop. Got it, he said, his voice taut with discovery. The Catherine Winslow Arts Foundation. 20 years ago, just after your mother's death, a series of large, anonymous cash donations were made to a small community clinic. The same clinic where paramedic George Pruitt's wife was receiving expensive experimental cancer treatment. Daphne stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. So he paid him off. It's more insidious than that, Liam said, shaking his head in disbelief. He funneled the money through his wife's foundation. It was the perfect laundry, washing his guilt with her philanthropy, the sheer audacity of it. They now had leverage, a clear motive for Pruitt's silence, but they didn't have to use it. That afternoon, Daphne's phone rang with an unlisted number. It was George Pruitt, his voice frail and etched with a guilt 2 decades could not erase. I can't sleep, the old man stammered. Seeing your face brought it all back. What he did, what I let him do. What happened that night, George? Daphne asked gently, putting the call on speaker for Liam to record. The story spilled out, a confession held for a lifetime. We got the call, a fall in an alley. George began, his voice trembling. When we arrived, your mother, Isla, was alive, conscious. She kept saying, my little girl is upstairs. And he was there. Everett Winslow, he looked like a cornered wolf. George's breath hitched. He pulled me aside. He showed me a picture of my wife, Helen, in her hospital bed. He knew about her leukemia, the cost of treatment. He said, can I ensure she gets the best care in the world? Or can I ensure she gets sent home with aspirin? It wasn't a bribe. It was a threat to my wife's life. Tears streamed down Daphne's face. He told me to delay. George continued, his voice breaking. To stabilize her at the site, to wait for special transport that would never come. He needed time for his fixer to manage the scene, to plant a whiskey bottle. Every minute we waited, she was dying. She whispered, tell my Daphne I love her. And then she was gone. I let her die to save my wife. My Helen died 2 years later anyway. I've been living in a house bought with blood money. The confession ended with a sob. Daphne felt a wave of vindication and profound sorrow. "George," she said, her voice filled with a strange compassion. "You'll testify to this?" A long silence. "Yes," he finally whispered. "So help me God. Yes." As Daphne secured her smoking gun, Everett Winslow's world was imploding. His wife, Catherine, had followed her own trail of suspicion, leading her to a locked filing cabinet in his study. Inside, she found a thin folder labeled Isla Trust, containing legal documents for Isla Penrose and her infant daughter, and beneath them, a yellowed letter in elegant feminine handwriting. "I don't want your money," it read. "I want the man I fell in love with. Don't throw us away." That afternoon, she confronted Everett in his study. Her rage was not hot, but a glacial force. She placed Isla's letter on his desk. "I found this," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "along with the trust documents for your secret family." Everett blanched. "Catherine, can I explain?" "Can you?" she interrupted, her eyes blazing. "Can you explain abandoning a woman who loved you and hiding your own child from me for our entire marriage? Or was her convenient accident also part of the plan?" "That's a monstrous thing to say," he stammered. "I'm married to a monstrous man," she retorted, sliding another set of papers across the desk. "These are from my foundation. Anonymous donations used to pay off a paramedic to cover up your ex-lover's death. You used my legacy, the one good thing I thought I was building, to hide your filth. You laundered your guilt through my life's work." He was speechless, exposed, and stripped bare by the one person he thought was his impenetrable ally. "I'm leaving, Everett," she declared. "My attorneys will be very interested in these documents." As she turned to go, Wyatt appeared in the doorway, drawn by the confrontation. He took in the letter, his mother's resolute face, and his father's utter defeat. "It's all true, isn't it?" he asked, his voice quiet with disgust. "I did it for us," Everett pleaded, a last desperate grasp at justification for this family. "You did it for yourself," Wyatt shot back, his voice trembling with anger. "You talk about strength and power, but you're a coward. You ran from a woman who loved you and a child who needed you, and you left her to die. That waitress, Daphne, has more integrity than you do in your whole body." Wyatt walked to his mother's side, a protective arm around her. "I'm with you, Mom." They left the study together, leaving Everett Winslow utterly alone in the heart of his empire, a king in a castle whose walls had just crumbled. The ghosts of the past no longer whispered. They were screaming, and the whole world was about to hear. The law firm conference room was a theater of reckoning. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Daphne with Liam and her attorney, Hannah Singh. A quiet but resolute Wyatt had taken a seat beside her, a clear declaration of his allegiance. On the other side, Everett Winslow was a hollowed-out version of his former self, flanked by a team of grim-faced legal counsel. Without preamble, Hannah Singh systematically dismantled Everett's defenses. She presented financial records tying the Winslow Foundation to George Pruitt, and then, with devastating finality, played the audio recording of the old paramedic's confession. George's trembling voice filled the room, recounting the threat, the order to delay treatment, and the final words of a dying woman. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Everett sat with his eyes closed, his face a stone mask. Daphne then spoke, her voice clear and steady as she addressed him directly. "This was never about your money. I don't want your tainted inheritance or your blood-stained legacy. This was for my mother, Isla, the woman you erased." She slid a photograph across the table. It wasn't of her with him, but of Isla alone, laughing, her face splattered with paint as she stood proudly before a vibrant canvas. "This is who she was," Daphne said, "before you tried to make her small, before you left her to die in an alley." Everett opened his eyes. He looked at the photograph of the woman he had lost, at the daughter who had her defiant eyes, and at the son, whose respect he had squandered. The Titan broke. A deep, ragged sigh escaped him. "It's true," he whispered, the words echoing like thunder. His lawyers flinched, but he silenced them with a gesture. "All of it." He looked at the image, the facade of the ruthless billionaire crumbling to dust. "I panicked. All I could think of was my career. I made the call. I told them to wait." He finally met Daphne's gaze, his own eyes swimming with tears. "I let her die. The confession was raw and total. The resolution that followed was swift. To avoid a public trial, Everett Winslow agreed to everything. He would resign as CEO of Winslow Industries. He would issue a full public confession, admitting his paternity and gross negligence. And he would fund the Isla Penrose Foundation with a $500 million endowment. The charity, dedicated to supporting struggling women artists, would be run by Daphne. As they exited, Everett stopped Daphne in the hallway. "I know 'I'm sorry' is a meaningless word," he said, his voice raspy. "But I am, for all of it." Daphne looked at the broken man and felt only a profound, aching sadness. "I accept your apology," she said softly. "Not for you, but for me." She turned and walked away without looking back. Weeks later, Daphne stood before a new headstone in a quiet cemetery. It read, "Isla Penrose, beloved mother, a bright light." The fight was over. She hadn't gained a father, but she had reclaimed her mother's name and her own future. Wyatt, now leading Winslow Industries with a vow of ethical leadership, was slowly building a tentative, supportive relationship with her. They were bound by a shared history, determined to create good from its wreckage. Daphne placed a single sunflower on the grave. The screaming had stopped. In the silence that followed, there was peace, and so Everett Winslow's empire, built on secrets and steel, was ultimately brought down not by a market collapse but by a ghost from the past and the unwavering courage of the daughter he abandoned. Daphne's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's been buried, will always fight its way to the surface. It shows us that integrity isn't about how much you have, but who you are when no one is watching. She didn't seek revenge. She sought justice. And in doing so, she not only honored her mother's memory, but also built a new legacy of hope and creativity from the ashes of a broken one. What did you think of Daphne's incredible journey? Do you believe Everett Winslow truly felt remorse in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are important to share as they remind us of the power of a single voice. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to Stories of Black Women for more dramatic, real-life stories you won't forget. Thanks for watching.